So this is a response to Ernest's video about Bataille and your experience as atheistic. And I want to start by just asking Ernest a question to try to better understand where he's coming from. Um, when you talk about yourself as an atheist, obviously it means you don't believe in theism. You're against theism, and I would put myself in the same category if that is what atheism refers to. And I've watched a few of your other blogs when you're talking about what atheism is for you. And I've growing up when I was younger, especially, I always almost instinctually reacted against um, uh, the traditional Western theistic religions. My dad is Jewish and my mom is Christian. Uh, my dad is pretty secular, but my mother is very religious, and I had sort of this church life shoved down my throat when I was younger, so I wasn't very impressed by it, and I moved away from it and more towards a scientific understanding. But then, about the time I was graduating high school, I think I started to get into the non-theistic religious traditions, basically Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, Zen, and these sorts of religion. There is no greater eternal being, such as a God, that exists outside of time. And I was my question is really, what is your position on these non-theistic religions, if they be called the religions? These non-theistic traditions, where in some forms of Hinduism, I guess there is an element of worship, um, such as like bhakti yoga, where it's devotional yoga, where your prayer and meditative practice is basically to give yourself to Brahman, which is roughly the Hindu equivalent to the Christian God. Um, so my question to you is, as an atheist, what is your position on the non-theistic traditions? Um, and that being said, I'll go on to give a little bit of my opinion about the rest of um, your blog about inner experience being atheistic. Um, and I agree with you and with Bataille. I haven't read any Bataille, but it seems that he's definitely trying to bring his consciousness back into his body. So in that sense, I'm all for that. I've loved what I've read so far from Merleau-Ponty's work and others who are trying to bring embodiment into the Western way of thinking about what it means to be human, and I think that's very important. And pain definitely does bring us back into our bodies, because for me, when I think of the mind, I think of this verbal, linguistic type of ability. And when you don't talk about pain, which is what I'm trying to say, pain is it's inexpressible in language. And we make up words for what pain is, but that's not what pain feels like, you know? When I have a stomach cramp, I call it a stomach cramp, but that's not what it is. What it is this unspeakable feeling that I have in my stomach, and I can't put words to it. And in that sense, it forces me to become aware of this becomingness that you're talking about, this existence in time where you can't really pin down what's going on. So pain definitely brings us back into our bodies. And in that sense, to talk about being as a noun instead of um, a verb, to be or becoming, that's basically all of Western philosophy, isn't it? I mean, beginning with Plato, that's being becomes all the eternal forms are these beings which exist outside of time that frame our experience for us, basically. And I think with postmodernism coming into the picture now, this view is really it's not tenable anymore, because we're becoming more aware of our consciousness being embodied, and of time being this constant process that we can't step out of. Um, and I also wanted to talk about prayer a little bit, because prayer definitely is a framing. I agree with that. It comes after our initial immediate experience, and it's part of us trying to make sense of this becomingness. But I think people that pray, I mean, I'm going to make a distinction between a genuine prayer and this kind of silly asking God to help you afford a new car or whatever. You know, genuine prayer would be, it's almost like talking to yourself to try to coax your own mind into this new way of being in the world. So, for example, you know, if you pray, if a Christian is praying to God for strength because one of their parents is dying, or strength because their child is needs some guidance and they don't know how to guide them correctly, they're praying to almost coax themselves into this new way of seeing the problem. So they're talking to themselves. And for human beings that exist within this framework of language, I mean, we can't deny that we do exist in a world inframed by words and linguistic expressions. And so for a Christian, prayer is this way of getting that the mind, or the verbal side of our existence, into line, into what they want it to be. And granted, they do speak when they pray as if they're talking to some external God, but I don't see, this isn't, they're not trying to be philosophically coherent. It's religion. It's nothing to do with that. It's more about how to live their life in the most fulfilled way that they can see, or that they can imagine. So yeah, I agree that prayer is a framing, but I think it has uses, and it's useful for people if they use it genuinely. On the other hand, the ingenuous kind of prayer, where you're asking God for something specific, whereas you're not asking for your inner experience to be transformed, but you're asking for some external material object almost for God to give you. That's different. I'm not talking about that kind of prayer. And you talk about this dualism that theologians typically have between the soul and the body, and philosophically I agree that's a big problem. But again, in the non-theistic Eastern traditions, such as Buddhism, there is no soul, and there's no body either. The mind and matter for them aren't two separate categories, and Buddhism has no God, but Buddhism is based on Hinduism, where Brahman is the supreme being. And unlike Christianity, Brahman exists as the world. Brahman is the world. So there's no Christian separation between creator and creation. In Hinduism, God is the world. Brahman is creation. So you can see how the dualism is sort of not really existent in that sense. So Brahman isn't outside time. Brahman is the dance of time. Brahman is becoming. Brahman doesn't know what Brahman does. So, whereas in Christianity, God is the maker of the machine, or the one who created the physical world of being that we all exist in. For Hinduism, that's not the case. Brahman is this immediate spontaneity where all of creation creates itself, and it's almost autopoetic in that sense. Which is different from the Christian tradition. Yeah, I look forward to a response from you, and thanks for listening.